Greetings, everyone. My name is Rory Ringrose, and I will be your host for the next 30 minutes. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to receive this information. I am an instructor here at CDSE. I am the course manager for the Security Awareness for Educators course, but as of yesterday, we are pulling that course down to be revamped, so look for it in the future. I am also an instructor in the Information Security Management. My producer today is Rachel Mojo, and before we get started, Rachel will provide you with the ground rules for today's webinar and some instructions on how to use the tools you will need to participate.
Okay, thank you, Roy. You can see at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there is a notes box, and it has the call-in number and any other announcements. This will remain on screen throughout the presentation. You can always reference it. If you'd like to get a larger view of the screen, you can select the full screen button up in the top banner of your screen. Remember, though, if you want to respond to poll questions, you need to be out of full screen mode, so just select the button again to get out of that mode. These poll questions, this is an example of what one looks like. We'll pop up a few throughout the webinar. Just select your answer and we'll provide some feedback. On the right, there is a Q&A box. If you have any questions, please enter them in the box. Because your phone is muted, it's your only way to communicate with us. We can get to your questions at the end of the presentation. We'll also have a Q&A posted online after the webinar. You'll also find a file share box at the bottom of your screen. There are two files there. One is the webinar slides for today's presentation, and the other is an excerpt from the DoD manual. Feel free to download those and print them out. I think I'm going to send this back to you, Roy.
Thanks, Rachel. So, as she mentioned, we have poll questions. So let's begin with one. There are merely a knowledge check here. What's the definition of original classification? Looks like everybody is doing pretty good there. Okay. Let's continue on. The answer actually is C, the initial decision that an item of information could reasonably be expected to cause identifiable or describable damage to the national security if subject to unauthorized disclosure and requires protection in the interest of national security. I can also see why a lot of you chose B. Thank you for your response. We will continue on. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll discuss the basics of original classification, original classification authority, where does it come from, original classification training. This is the training that an OCA needs, or original classification authority. The scope of their authority, and can that individual assign or delegate their position to a subordinate? So let's start with our first topic. Let's begin with explaining why information is classified. We've included an excerpt from DoD Manual 5200.01, Volume 1, Enclosure 4, Paragraph 4 in the file share box that you see on your screen. This excerpt is from the manual and defines original classification. The manual states that information must be classified only to protect national security. Original classification is the first step in providing protection to information. All other classification decisions and safeguarding requirements are based on the original classification decision. The manual further states that if there is significant doubt about the need to classify information, then the information should not be classified. Likewise, unnecessary or higher than necessary classification is also prohibited. While the DoD manual describes why information will be classified, Executive Order 13526 establishes the legal authority for certain officials within the executive branch of the federal government to designate classified national security information. The individuals who perform classification are referred to as classifiers. Additionally, Executive Order 13256 mandates that no information can remain classified indefinitely. So information must be declassified as soon as it no longer qualifies for classification. There are certain conditions under which information can be classified. Classifying may be appropriate only to information that is owned by, produced by, or for, or is under the control of the U.S. government. Section 1.4 of Executive Order 13256 further defines categories of information that may be classified. There is a summary of these categories on our screen. Classifying information incurs costs, things like security clearances, physical security measures, countermeasures. Therefore, original classifiers must be careful and consistent in their decision-making in order to minimize the cost impact, while ensure the proper level of classification. If there is significant doubt about the need to classify, then the original classification authority should not classify that information. In fact, only a limited number of people are authorized to perform original classification. These individuals must follow a specific process when doing so to ensure the classification is appropriate and reasonable. An individual who is authorized to perform original classification duties is referred to as an original classification authority, or an OCA. Derivative classification is quite different. It is the process of using existing classified information to create new material and marking that new developed material consistent with classification markings that apply to the source information. Individuals who perform derivative classification are known as derivative classifiers, in contrast to original classifiers. There are a great many individuals who do derivative classification. Original classification authorities have an important responsibility to ensure they make effective classified decisions. They must follow a specific six-step process which takes different elements into account at different stages of the process. Before considering original classification, an OCA must determine whether decisions have already been made about classification of the information. If another OCA already has an original classification determination, then the information cannot be originally classified again. However, if the information has not been classified, OCAs can proceed with the decision-making process. The process OCAs follow when determining whether to classify information are shown on our slide. At each step, if the information does not meet the criteria to become classified, the process terminates and the OCA will not classify the information. So before we move on to our next topic, let's look at another poll question. What policy establishes the legal authority for certain officials to designate classified national security information? Okay. Our answer here is B. It is Executive Order 135-296. Looks like most everybody has answered that question correctly. Thank you for your quick response. Okay. We'll now discuss original classification authority. Who has authority to make original classification decisions? Original classification authority is not granted to a particular individual in the government, but rather to specific positions. The positions that have original classification authority include the President of the United States, the Vice President in the performance of executive duties, Secretary of Defense, the Secretaries of Military Departments, and other original classification authority is also granted to certain officials within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, or otherwise known as OSD. The government will grant requests for original classification authority under a specific set of circumstances. A request for original classification authority will be granted when there is a demonstrable and continuing need to exercise OCA during the normal course of operations. The candidate has adequate information and experience available to make classified decisions. Requests will be granted only when existing security classification guides are insufficient in addressing the information in question, and when it is impractical to refer the decision to another OCA. In order for an individual to exercise original classification authority, he or she must have appropriate level of security clearance, must have received training in the fundamentals of proper security classification to include the avoidance of overclassification. The individual must also have significant experience and information available to prevent effective decision classification making. We'll now switch gears and discuss original classification training. What training is required to be an original classification authority? OCAs must be trained extensively before they can start executing their authority to originally classify information, and they must receive refresher training once a year after the initial training. The training shall address OCA responsibilities and classification principles, proper safeguarding of classified information, and the criminal, civil, and administrative sanctions that may be brought against an individual. As part of their training, OCAs must know the answers to these questions related to classifying information. What is the difference between original and derivative classification? What are the prohibitions and limitations on classifying information? OCAs must also know the following related to duration and declassification. What is the process for determining the duration of classification? What are the general standards and procedures for applying declassification instructions? OCAs must also know the basic portion, banner, and classification authority block, markings for those that must appear on classified information. Regarding communicating classified decisions, OCAs must know the requirements and standards for creating and maintaining and publishing security classification guides. And finally, OCAs must be aware of the procedures and sanctions related to safeguarding classified information. Next, we'll discuss the scope of the authority possessed by an original classification authority. Once appointed, OCAs are granted classification authority in a specific level of classification. This authority can extend to lower classification levels. For example, an OCA that has a top secret classification authority may classify information at top secret, secret, and confidential levels. However, an OCA that has been granted secret classification authority may only classify information at the secret and confidential levels. When OCAs are appointed, they are given a specific area of jurisdiction. That is, they are assigned a specific realm in which they are qualified to make original classification decisions. This jurisdictional limit on authority helps ensure that OCAs are working in their realm of expertise and experience. For example, an air wing commander would not be granted original classification jurisdiction for an undersea warfare program. It's been a while since we've had a poll question, so let's take another one. In this question, think back to the OCA basics we discussed earlier in the presentation. How are classification decisions made? Looks like most everybody has the correct answer. The answer is D, both A and C, which is originally and derivatively. Thank you for responding. We will continue. Our last topic is assigning or delegating an OCA to a subordinate. Let's see if it's possible to delegate an OCA authority to a subordinate. An OCA may not delegate or assign his or her authority to someone else. If a person in a position of original classification authority will be unable to perform his or her duties for an extended period, the authority to perform original classification may be assumed by another individual. For example, that person's deputy or vice commander, chief of staff, or similar immediate subordinates of the OCA are empowered to exercise authority when they officially assume the OSA's position in an acting capacity. This is the same as being the acting commander. They assume that responsibility when the other is not there. Before a subordinate acting in the capacity of an OCA can perform original classification, he or she must certify in writing that they have been trained as an OCA. Those records of delegation or training must be maintained by your activity security manager. Let's do another poll question. Can an OCA assign their authority to someone else? Looks like the majority of our folks have answered the correct question, which is B. They can't assign their authority to someone else, but when someone is taking their place, that authority then can be passed to that individual. It gets kind of tricky sometimes. The national security of the United States depends on protection of sensitive information. The initial determination that information needs to be protected as classified is known as original classification. Only certain individuals, known as original classification authorities, have the authority to make these decisions. In this webinar, you learned about their role and responsibilities, the requirements they must meet, as well as the processes they follow in making these determinations. Remember, this was just the basics that we're covering today. CDSE produces and provides a wide range of security education, training, and awareness products to support the security manager's mission. This includes instructor-led training, e-learning courses, training products across the entire range of responsibilities assigned to an activity security manager. On the CDSE website, you can find additional information about CDSE products, access the e-learning courses, register for instructor-led courses, download job aids, and security awareness material. For further information about original classification, you can take our online original classification training course. Information security-related e-learning is accessed on the CDSE's learning management system called STEP. The STEP system not only provides multimedia-rich courseware, but retains and maintains learners' records and transcripts. STEP is available to use for DoD and other U.S. government personnel and contractors within the National Industrial Security Program. CDSE also offers 2 extensive instructor-led courses for personnel engaged in DoD information security responsibilities. The DoD Security Specialist course provides an overview of a broad range of security topics and is targeted to those personnel who have little or no security-related experience. The Information Security Manager's course is a mid-level course that is intended for those personnel who have functional working knowledge of the DoD Information Security Program. In addition to instructor-led and e-learning courses, CDSE also offers a wide variety of instructional media in support of the DoD Information Security Program. This includes security shorts, which are targeted e-learning courses designed to be completed in less than 15 minutes, and short training videos on various security procedures and practices. CDSE also produces various job aids to assist security professionals. You'll find an original classification authority desktop reference included in the list of job aids, and this guide outlines steps in the original classification process. Finally, CDSE also produces a variety of products aimed at assisting security managers in their security awareness efforts, such as freely distributable awareness posters. Let's take a moment to address some of the questions we have received. Our first question is, can an individual appointed as an OCA continue to make original classification decisions after leaving their OCA position or post? Answer is no. Original classification authority is designated by virtue of position, although we do mention individuals. The DoD Manual 5200.01, Volume 1, Enclosure 4, which is in our file sharing box, cites this requirement. We received an additional question about a scenario in which an OCA has received classified information and determined that the information does not require protection, but release should be delayed in the interest of national security. What determination should that OCA make? The answer is that the OCA may not classify the information, although this information fits or may fit into one of the eligible categories of information. Classified information does not require, if it does not require protection, you cannot classify it in order or to delay it. This is actually prohibited under Executive Order 13526. Before we conclude today's presentation, we hope you'll take a moment to participate in our survey. Your feedback is very helpful to us and is greatly appreciated. If you have ideas for further webinar topics, you're able to share those in this survey. Frequently asked questions for this webinar will be posted on the CDSE webinar website. You may also email information security related questions to us at informationsecurity.training@dss.mil. Thank you for attending our webinar today. Have a good day.